Today is June 20th, 2013. We're at the home of Dr. William K. Simmons, discussing the history of the college and his life and anything else he'd like to discuss today. We're going to go very informal and just let him go with it. A little while ago you were discussing, you'd mentioned your mother. You kind of brought that up and how she had arrived here and whatnot.
Yes, my mother went to school at what was Glenville Normal School at the time to become a teacher, public school teacher. She was from Vandalia, West Virginia, in Lewis County. And as I recall, she said that she got on the train at Walkersville and came to Burnsville. And at Burnsville, got on a riverboat and came to Glenville. That was the way she got to Glenville Normal School. And she didn't make that trip often. She came when the semester started, and usually at the end of the semester went back home. And she stayed the required time to get a certificate to teach, and she taught one-room schools. And I think that as I look back, there are a lot of things that make people's lives. My father was a farmer, and my mother had been a school teacher. She read to us mornings after breakfast. We'd sit on the edge of the bed or in a chair, and she read to us before we went to school.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time I went to school, I was already culturally tuned in to learning to read and to write. And I think about a lot of children today who don't have that advantage. And sometimes as educators, we assume things that, based on our own experience, that we can't really assume for others. So from early on, I was oriented to education.
Mm-hmm. I
had some very, very fine teachers in our public schools. As I look back on it, I don't think we could have been any more fortunate.
Well, had your mother had any prior schooling in a one-room school or anything like that?
I'm assuming that her schooling had been in a one-room school, and of course that's what she taught in.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, someone who teaches a one-room school teaches multiple grade levels. And today we narrow down preparation for teachers to very prescribed areas. And a teacher in a one-room school taught everything from first grade through grade 6 or 8.
Uh-huh.
And so they had to have a lot of versatility in their training and in understanding of what kids should be learning. And I think maybe there's a lesson in that as we look at the shortage of dollars for education. And it's serious. I know we always talk about, well, there isn't enough money. And here in West Virginia right now, we're seeing a lot of consolidation of schools. We're seeing a lot of streamlining because the dollars that we collect to run our schools are getting scarcer. And in many areas in our state, there are some significant population shifts. Some areas are losing population, others gaining, and it often happens in a way that our school systems are not quick to adapt to. So we may need to go back to the idea that when we hire an elementary teacher, they can teach in 2 or 3 grade levels. And my fields are English and biology, and I'm certified to teach in either area. However, for the most part, you wouldn't hire a biology teacher to teach English classes. So I think that while I'm not saying we're going to go back to one-room schools, I think some of the methodology and preparation for teaching students we may have to look back to some of those areas.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, moving a little forward, you said your father was a farmer. Where was he from?
He was from here in Gilmer County. our family came from Germany in the 1740s to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and spent 4 or 5 years among the German people in Pennsylvania. And in the 1750s, they wound up in Pendleton County, Virginia, at Sugar Grove. There was land available, and so they were farmers and teachers and preachers. Most of them had sawmills, grist mills, and a few of them whiskey stills.
Mm-hmm.
But they, after a couple of generations there in Pendleton County with big families, a lot of them immigrated to what is now central West Virginia. So my great-great-grandfather, David Simmons, came to Freeman's Creek in Lewis County. And then my great-grandfather, John Simmons, came from Highland County to Lewis County. And when my great-great-grandfather passed away in the 1860s, my family moved to the mouth of Cove Creek here in Gilmer County, near Troy. And so from there here to Ellis Run and Flat Run, and so my father was born here in Gilmer County, and he lived on the family farm. We raised cattle and hogs and sheep, and as I look back, for someone to make a living on a hillside farm in central West Virginia, you had to be one of the world's best managers. You had chickens, you had hogs, you had sheep. At different times of the year, you could sell wool, you could sell lambs. In the fall, you sold calves, later on steers, and it was a matter of managing the resources that you had. And so from early on, I learned to work. When I was 10 years old, my father asked me if I wanted to ride the horse in the hayfield. Well, sure, any 10-year-old kid wants to ride a horse. Well, the next thing I knew, I was hauling hay shocks. And then it was hoeing corn and milking cows. And so we grew up with the idea that we all were going to work at something. And it never entered my mind that I was not going to work at something.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turned out, education was a thing that was for me.
When do you think you made that decision?
Actually, my brothers and sisters they went to college. Not all of them finished, some of them did. In fact, my mother's family were educators. My Uncle Creed taught history at Walkersville High School for 50 years. He lived to be over 100, but he was a teacher.
What was your mother's maiden name?
McHugh.
McHugh.
McHugh. And Uncle Ernie McHugh was the director of extension at WVU. And so, you know, I came from a family of farmers and a family of educators. And while I was in high school, I was senior class president, junior class president, and I lettered for 4 years in football and was co-captain of the football team.
And you went to high school right at Gilmer County?
And I went to Glenville High School. When I was a sophomore, our high school was condemned and closed. And my class finished the last 2 years at the recreation center, which was the old Poor Farm. And we had classes in the cabins there.
Was the high school, I'm sorry to interrupt, was the high school that was condemned, would that have been the one that was on campus?
Yes. Okay. Yes, it was where the new dormitory sits. Mm-hmm. And so we finished 2 years of high school out at the old Poor Farm, and we walked from cabin to cabin. But we had good teachers. And there were 21 in my high school graduating class, and out of that 21, 19 went to college. And when I got to college, I went to Glenville because I got a year's scholarship. My plan was to become a veterinarian, and I had by the time I was a sophomore at Glenville, I had most of my pre-vet work. I had animal husbandry and the biology and the chemistry.
The farm was active at that time, is that correct?
What's that?
The college farm, would it have been active at that time?
Yes, we had the college farm, which was, at that time was a vital part of the total college operation. When I was in the beginnings of my junior year, I believe, English literature was a class that was required. And I took a course in English Lit to Dr. S.B. Miller. And in that class, it was just like a light came on. I thought, this is for me. This is for me. And so I took another English class and another. And I finally decided, this is what I want to do. I want to teach English. I love the ideas that, we studied from Chaucer to Wordsworth and Tennyson and Browning, and it opened up a world of intellectual inquiry that I loved. And so I finished school with degrees in English and biology. As I said earlier, I'm certified permanently to teach English and biology. And so when I finished my degree at Glenville, I very soon got married. My first teaching job was at Harpers Ferry High School in Jefferson County. I taught English 7 through 12.
Oh, if you don't mind me asking, where did you meet your wife?
At Glenville State.
Okay. She was a student?
She was a student, and she was an elementary education major. But we met here and dated and decided that we wanted a life together. And so we got married, and we both went to Jefferson County at Harpers Ferry and taught our first year. Being a farmer and being attached to a place, Jefferson County was a little too far away from home. I liked hunting and fishing and walking around the farm, and so we decided to come back a little closer to Gilmer County, and we both got jobs in Wood County. And I taught at Ben Franklin Junior High, and she taught in an elementary school. In the meantime, I worked on a master's degree at WVU, and when I finally finished my MA in English, there was a job opening here at Glenville State, and I was hired to teach English. And we moved back here, and my wife got a job here teaching elementary in Gilmer County, and I taught at GSC.
When did you do the majority of your graduate work? When did you find time to do that as you were
Well, I did it in the summers. I taught in the winter and went to Morgantown in the summer, and it finally got down to a point where what I needed to do had to be done during the regular school year, and so I took a leave of absence from Wood County and went to Morgantown, and by myself. I stayed up there in a little apartment, did my own cooking and my own studying, and I finished up at the end of the spring semester, and then I was hired here at Glenville in the fall.
Okay.
But yes, I went up on my own.
And your time at Glenville, I mean, you were, I know one thing, that you were the mascot for 1 year, is that correct?
Yes, I was the pioneer, and I have a wonderful charcoal sketch of a pioneer picture that one of our really great art students did for me, which I'll show you in a little while.
Okay. Did you enjoy your time as the pioneer? I mean,
well, it was a lot of fun. A lot of the kids ran up to me and tried to pull that raccoon tail that was on my hat. But yes, that was a great time. And when I was elected pioneer, President Heflin called me in his office, And we sat there and talked for a while. He said, "No, Bill," he said, "the Pioneer last year got drunk and got down behind the field house over at the stadium. And he said, I want to advise you that if you do that, you will be the last Pioneer that this college has."
Mm-hmm.
And I thanked him and assured him that that wouldn't happen.
Uh-huh. So you probably left a little something a little lighter in your jug.
I had some apple cider.
Another quick question before we move on. Did your family, did either one of your parents, during your decision making in college, did they sway you either way, or did they say, well, why didn't you go this direction, or should you go this direction, or?
No, they let all six in our family decide for ourselves.
Okay.
One brother decided to go to the Air Force, and one of them went to D.C. to work in the post office department. But no, they gave us the freedom to choose the path that we wanted, and I greatly respected that.
Okay. Well, before I start interrupting you, sir, you were at the basically discussing. You'd been hired at Glenville State College, and you'd completed your master's degree, and you've got a job here at Glenville State.
Yes, and I taught English at GSC for, I think it was approximately 3 years, and I wanted to go on and do a doctorate. Before I left WVU was getting ready to offer a PhD in English, and I discussed it with some of the faculty there that I really had grown to respect, and they suggested that probably I should go where there was already an established program, that their program was not yet fully put together. And Ohio University, I looked at Ohio University and I looked at Ohio State, and at that time Ohio University had one of the strongest doctoral programs in English of any school in the country. We had one or two Glenville graduates to go there, and they had had a good experience, and they were also highly regarded by the faculty there. I made a trip to Ohio University to discuss it with the chairman of the graduate committee there, and he looked at my work, and he looked at the experience I'd had, and said, you know, that I probably could get a teaching assistantship, and he encouraged me to apply, which I did, and I was accepted. I believe it was in 1967, my wife and I entered the PhD program at Ohio University, and she had a teaching job in Athens County. We spent 2 years and 3 summers there in that program, and I taught freshman English and sophomore English. I took the graduate classes, including 2 foreign languages. They had a very, very rigorous program. Had some absolutely outstanding faculty members. In fact, when Vernon Alden was appointed president at Ohio University, he set out on a mission to recruit top scholars from across the country to come to Ohio University. And I read an article in Life magazine at one point, and they referred to it as Harvard on the Hocking, that it really did have an outstanding program, and I found that to be true. I was particularly interested in the 19th century, and I was because it was a time of tremendous change. Society was changing from muscle power to mechanical power. That the invention of the steam engine brought about a tremendous change to all of society, in moving from old ideas to new ideas. For example, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution was a whole new way of looking at life in the universe. And that period of time, with its change and challenge, greatly interested me because, you know, when I grew up on the farm, when I was first involved in farming, we used teams of horses to do our farm work, and we cut our fields with scythes. Well, I was with my father when he bought his first tractor in 1949, and you know, I saw the change just on a local level that occurred. But when you get to a philosophical level in dealing with ideas and trying to explain man's position in the universe, that challenge was even greater. And so that period of time really interested me. Also, what interested me, and I didn't know it at the time, I took a field in English language. And I studied English just like you'd study German or French. And so I learned to read Anglo-Saxon, Old Low German, because that's what English is. And I took to that like a duck to water. I mean, it just was something that I just became greatly interested in. I had no idea at the time, but probably my grandfather still spoke some of that Old Low German. And you know, I'm not saying it was genetic, I'm just saying that I had an inclination toward it. And so I completed a program in English language. I can read Anglo-Saxon, I read Middle English, I read French, I read German, and I read some Old Norse because of that experience. I also, as a teaching assistant, I was called in one day by the chairman of the graduate committee, and he said, you know, the black students want black studies. The American Indian students want American Indian studies. He said all these groups now have their own studies program. Now, the Appalachian kids have come and they said they want an Appalachian studies program. Now, he said, you're from the middle of Appalachia. And he said, you're going to develop it. And so I set about developing a program in Appalachian Studies, and we initiated it at Ohio University, worked with students to do it, and when I came back to Glenville, I brought it back with me. And Glenville State College was the first school in the state to have teacher certification in Appalachian Studies. It was an interesting time to be in school. I learned a lot studying existential philosophy, Old English, and everything that I went there to do. In the spring of '69, I completed my dissertation, all of my doctoral exams, and believe me, those exams are not for the faint of heart. That was tough.
May I ask what you did your dissertation on?
I did my dissertation on Alfred Lord Tennyson's Idylls of the King. I did a study of the what Alfred Tennyson did as time passed in his writings. He revised as he began to formulate his vision of what it was that he was trying to convey. Idylls of the King was written over a period of 40 years. And as he matured as a writer and thinker, he went back into the various editions and made significant changes. And what I did with one part of Idylls of the King, I examined every known edition of that poem. There were many of them. and noted every change that he made and how it reflected a substantive change in his thinking. It was about 119 pages, and there were other students who were working on other aspects of that poem. My advisor was Dr. Roma King, and he was a nationally, well, internationally known Browning scholar and Tennyson. And so I had a good experience with him, and when I finished my work, I have absolutely nothing but the greatest respect for Ohio University and that program, because they gave me a wonderful, wonderful education. And hopefully over the years I have been able to share that with a multitude of students. But in the spring of '69, when I was to graduate, we had no commencement because students had threatened to riot. And so the school decided that they would not have a commencement.
And this would have been affiliated with the Vietnam War?
Yes. What happened though, that very weekend, Athens was, the Hocking River quite frequently flooded Athens. There was a flood, and those same students who had threatened to riot and disrupt commencement went downtown and helped people move things out of their houses and help take care of a lot of the flooding problems.
Mm-hmm.
I had to wait until the next year to go back to commencement and get my doctoral hood. But it was a fascinating time. You see, for me, coming from Central West Virginia and my family values and what I'd learned, the protesters, that represented something pretty intriguing to me. And yet I understood where they were coming from. It's just that I didn't express my displeasure with the war in the same way they did. But it was the beginnings really of a time when people felt free to protest things. Mm-hmm. And it was an extremely interesting time to be in higher education.
Okay. Well, after finishing your doctorate up then, did you have intentions of returning to Glenville?
I did and didn't. I had some other opportunities. But that Appalachian Studies program had an impact on me. I almost had a missionary dimension to my thinking at that time. And I thought, there are students who come from places that, they can just, they're privileged in a lot of ways, because having the money to go to school is not a problem. Access to a school is not a problem. But back in West Virginia, there are a lot of limitations. And maybe the best thing I could do with my life would be to go back and give others some opportunities. And I had an opportunity because of my family and the good teachers I had. And I thought, well, I think for one thing, after you go through the rigors of a doctoral program, you kind of need to find yourself again. And so I decided to come back and teach and try to give students benefit of what I'd learned. And I came back here to teach, and my wife came back. We were both different as a result of our education and experience. I was certainly a different teacher, a better teacher. And at that time, we had a wonderful lot of very able students. And so when I came back to Glenville to teach, we had classes that were 30 and 35, sometimes more. And I was full of it, and I got in there and taught them, and a great number of them went on to get masters and doctorates. I can name you many of those students. Had one student who went directly from Glenville to American University in a doctoral program. And so we were very, it was a very good time, and I still have great respect for those students. It was a time when a lot of things came together. It was a good time for me, and it was a good time for students because, you know, I was able to do what I really had dreamed I could do. And, you know, after 2 or 3 years, I was eligible to be promoted, and I was promoted to full professor. And in a short time, I became academic vice president and served there for 3 years.
And you would have been serving under D. Banks?
D. Banks Wilburn, yes. When he was ready to retire, there was a lot of campus politics going on at that time.
Something you mentioned before the interview, you'd said that over the years there have been many, many times, even from the very beginnings, you know, the history is documented, that there's always been people wanting to close the school.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And H. Laban White was on our college advisory board and part of our alumni group for a long time, and he used to be Speaker of the House in the state legislature.
I'm sorry. Where we'd left off, you were discussing H. Laban White?
Yes, he served for a number of years as Speaker of the House of Delegates. And he would report to us occasionally at meetings, you know, that there's still a lot of discussion, you know, people want to close down Glenville State College, and that there, you know, frequently were bills introduced to do so, but they didn't really get very far. But the notion was always there that you know, we don't need Glenville State College. And you know, at the period of time that I was academic vice president and President Wilburn was here, we had a state board of regents. The state board of regents had established some you know, very notable policies and funding formulas, which, you know, were explainable. And one thing that most of us talked about a great deal was FTE, full-time equivalent students. And so schools were funded based on the number of FTE students. And an FTE student is one student carrying 15 hours. So Glenville's enrollment was not good. And at that time, the state was subsidizing. We did not have enough FTEs to generate enough funds actually to operate.
So at this point, the Board of Regents had been in existence for at least a few years.
Yes.
Okay.
And so it was evident they didn't want to be subsidizing schools. And if you know, if you're a legislator and you're trying to answer to people how money is expended, they keep raising, well, you know, why are you spending money on Glenville State for a few students when they could go somewhere else and we wouldn't have this expense? And so, you know, we were in a position where we needed students, and at that time Glenville went to Parkersburg to offer 4-year degrees on the campus of Parkersburg Community College.
Was that initiated under Dr. Wilburn?
Dr. Wilburn. He and I went down there time after time, and the negotiations there were pretty contentious because, you know, we were the little guys from up the Little Kanawha, and they were in a much bigger place, and I don't care, you know, that makes a difference. You know, how big or how little you are when you sit down at the table.
Yes.
But nonetheless, we were able to offer business degrees and teacher education degrees on the campus Parkersburg Community College. We did that largely because the Regents insisted that we find ways of increasing our enrollment. Also at that time, each college had a service area. It was expected to serve. We had a 7-county area, which covered Gilmer and Calhoun and Braxton and Lewis County and all the way up to Nicholas County. We were encouraged to offer classes in high schools, which we did. We have classes in the evenings for high school seniors who could enroll and for anyone else who needed a class. That helped a good deal, but we were still under pressure. So President Wilburn called me and he was announcing his retirement. And he told me that he was going to retire, that he wanted me to apply for the job. And I said, well, President Wilburn, I don't want this job. His response was, the college is in trouble and it needs someone with your vision to lead it. He said, I want you to apply. Well, I was 36 or whatever. I thought I was a little bit young for the position, but I had had 3 years of academic work and had gotten along very well. Got established in the state. So I went ahead and applied and was selected. So at age 37, I became president of GSC.
At that time period, how did the selection process work?
Well, what happened, the campus had a committee, and it interviewed candidates and then made recommendations to the State Board of Regents.
And there was you mentioned there, at that time period, there was a board of advisors, is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
And from there, I went before the State Board of Regents and was interviewed. And then they made the selection. They were very much interested. They asked me about new programs and what I would do, to increase the enrollment. They wanted to get Glenville off the subsidy list. They did not want it. They did not want to be subsidizing schools because it's, no school has enough money. And for those who were not subsidized, they still didn't have enough money. And
Can you describe that term just a little bit? I mean, what do you mean by subsidy?
Well, for example, I'll use an example for public schools. Right now, Gilmer County Schools funded for 1,400 students. We actually have 935.
Okay.
And to run the county, it takes more than you get funded for 935 students. At the time, GSC did not have enough FTE enrollment. If we were funded just based on that, we couldn't have operated the campus. So we had a figure at which we could operate the school, and then we had the figure of what we were entitled to under the formula. And there was a good deal of difference. So what the regents did, they simply put that extra money in our budget. For example, if you had 1,000 students on the campus and you got funded for those 1,000 students, if you look at the facilities, all of the buildings and what it takes to operate, you have to have a business office, you have to have an academic office. You go down as to what you have to have. Actually, you could accommodate 2,000 or 3,000 students with the same facilities, but if you only got 1,000 and it takes that amount of money to operate, you don't have enough money to operate your campus. And that's kind of where it was.
Now, had numbers changed at all? I mean, I could look at these records and see, but I mean, there wasn't a drastic change in numbers. It was more of a change in society as a whole. Am I wrong in saying that?
Well, I think there's a lot of that. You see, when you begin to look at where we are and the changes, cultural changes, and economic changes, for one thing, over a period of time, transportation has changed. Even during my tenure as president, the average age of the student changed. And I know that colleges orient themselves toward recruiting 17 and 18-year-olds. Interestingly enough, the average age of our student about the time I retired was 26. Why? Because a lot of our students were commuters, a lot of them were young adults, some with families and some with jobs. Their college experience came out of whatever time they could fit into their lives and accessibility. And those are things, you know, I scratch my head yet today and wonder why we are so zeroed in on seeing the college student as an 18-year-old that we're recruiting. And yes, there are those there. But the last few years of my teaching, I would say the average age of my student was 25 to 35. And some of the best students I've ever taught, because they're in school for a very serious reason. And I think a lot of that has happened, and a lot of it, schools are very slow to adapt to change. They're traditional by nature. And anytime that you want to make a change, you always have a lot of people say, oh, no, we shouldn't be doing that, because they're comfortable with what they've been doing, and they're uncomfortable with trying something new. And during my time, we had to make changes. And so Parkersburg was there, and right at the time we were going down there were those who were saying, oh, they're going to just take us over. They're going to take us over. Well, there was that mentality here. And when I became president, the Board of Regents made it clear to me they wanted to get the enrollment up here. That was one thing. I had some new programs in mind. We did a lot of changing. I had a good relationship with the Board of Regents, and I'll have to say that almost anything that I went before them to request that looked feasible, they approved. As I indicated, we were sitting in the middle of a place that's just rich in natural gas. I looked at the land we held, and we owned all the royalty. And so I proposed on a Sunday afternoon that we drill a gas well. It was met with some laughter and some seriousness, but one of the board members, who was a good businessman, he said, you know, let this man talk. And I explained how we owned it and how it would be one of those things that would make a difference between extreme austerity and a little cushion to do something with. And so before the afternoon was over, they'd authorized us to drill our first gas well. Also, we had been looking at our off-campus needs. In Nicholas, Webster, and part of Braxton County, that was an area of the state that was most underserved by higher education.
Mm-hmm.
And we proposed that we do an off-campus center in Summersville. In higher education, there's a lot of territorialism. And the folks on down below Summersville, Beckley, Oak Hill, and that area, were not particularly anxious that there be a college in Summersville. And I had to wait for the appropriate time in order to do that, but I went before the Board of Regents and asked for permission to do an off-campus center in Summersville, and they thought it was a great idea and approved it. Now, we did this by the seat of our pants because we didn't have any money.
When do you think, I mean, approximately, when was the initial discussions about the
About 1983, 84, 85.
Okay.
I'd just been acting chancellor and had gotten pretty familiar with the political and legislative process, and I got to know Senator Tucker, who was the Senate president and from Nicholas County, and we discussed it. And I had to have help to do it, and so we got permission to do it. It's just we didn't have any money, and the regents didn't have any money, and they said, well, you find a way to do it. So I met with the Nicholas County Commission, and they were 100% behind it. So we drove around Summersville, Larry Tucker and I, and looked for a site. The county commission owned the property right there where 19 is, where the school's now located, and we looked at it and I said, let's do something that's accessible and that's nice.
No, was the library in existence at that time?
No.
No. Okay.
So we decided that would be the place. The county commission owned it. I went back and met with them, and we tried to figure out a way to finance it. They said, okay, we can go to the bank and borrow the money to build it. We had some sketches of what we wanted to do. I had just finished drilling this well out on the college farm, and it came in a good well. And so we were going to have pretty good income from that well. And I said, well, can we finance this thing? I'll use the proceeds from the gas well to pay our payment on the building. And that's what we did. We built the building, the county commission built the building. I used the money from the gas well, and that's how we were paying for it. Well, as soon as we opened that center in Nicholas County, we had a good enrollment. In some of the other issues, when I was in that acting chancellor and chancellor's position, one of the legislators from Wood County was the chairman of the House Finance Committee. Called me in one day and he said, we have this bill ready. It's going to be introduced, and we're going to change the mission of Glenville State to a 2-year school, and Parkersburg's going to be the 4-year school. You'll see, they had our 4-year programs there. And I said, well, I don't like this idea, because this has been around for a while. And I said, there's got to be another way. And he said, well, I'm just telling you, they want a 4-year school in Parkersburg. And you don't have that kind of enrollment, you're up there in the country, you can be a 2-year school, and that's in this bill. So we got, and it was serious. I looked at it, and they had a good deal of clout in the legislature at that time. And, if you weren't involved in it personally, it would have made sense. If you didn't have a stake in it and you looked at this shift from a low population area to a large population area where there are more students, you'd say, well, yeah, they need to be the 4-year school.
So the politicians in that area were pushing for that.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And it was, and I think there are people here in this community who will verify what I'm telling you. It was on its way. And I was in a position at the time where I could fight it. And so what I did, I finally told them what we could do. I would give them the 4-year programs that we had in Parkersburg, and just take that bill off the table, and then just leave us alone as 4-year school. Because I knew that in Nicholas County we had enrollment potential. So they finally agreed, rather than to have a big fight in the legislature, if I do that they would take it off the table. My agreement was they could have the programs, but we took all the money we had invested. And so that's after I left the chancellor's office. As soon as I left, we went down and had a big powwow, and I took everything that was there that was loose. The only thing I left were the programs. I took all the money from the faculty. I took everything that was there.
Would this have been after your first stint as chancellor?
That was after my second term.
Okay.
We had 300 students down there. So I took all that and I put it back up Nicholas County. And when we opened, we had 300 students up there. I never lost a student in that, and I kept Glenville intact. But you see, there were people who had designs on changing Glenville from what it was.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but at that time period, I mean, there was a lot of people having ideas of changing the entire system.
Oh, yes.
And is there anything you'd like to say about Governor Moore and the Carnegie study?
Well, I was part of that.
Uh-huh.
I was chancellor at the time, and the Carnegie study was initiated by the legislature. I worked with it. I had a representative of that study at every board meeting. They studied everything that was there, and their conclusion was that the system was good and that it should continue.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that were people pushing for that study to get different results?
Oh, yes, yes. They needed some kind of rationalization. You see, for, gosh, years and years, the Charleston Gazette almost every week would run an editorial, "Abolish the worthless Board of Regents." That was, you could expect every time you picked up the paper, there was some criticism of the Board of Regents. And by the time the Carnegie study was done, it had been in place about 20 years. Most legislators told me that every 20 years you need to change the system. And what people were talking about at the time, they wanted a university board, or a coordinating board. They didn't like the idea that the regents, as a system, it was totally autonomous. They could make decisions regarding higher education regardless of what the legislature or the governor might have thought. And
or the universities.
Yes, and the universities were there. And in fact, I'll give you a little bit of history on that, because when the Board of Regents was established, and it was established because the legislature said, we've got things strung all over, and we got duplications of programs, and we just need to get back and get control of higher education. And so the Regents was the model that they developed, and the original model excluded WVU. Everyone was to have been under the State Board of Regents except West Virginia University.
This is land grant, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, I was not there, but I'm told that the then president at WVU became rather arrogant with some legislators about the whole issue. And they said, well, we'll just put WVU under the Board of Regents too. And so they did that without WVU's blessing. They wanted to be totally autonomous on their own. Mm-hmm. But they were put in the system with the other schools. Well, anytime that you have a state university in the same system with little schools, there's always a struggle. Mm-hmm. Although I'll have to say that in my time, I thought everyone was treated pretty fairly. That I have a very high regard for the manner in which the State Board of Regents managed higher education.
So even though this was probably before your time, you don't believe that the system was working top-notch before, when it was just the Department of Education was running the whole shebang?
Exactly.
It's just
it
too
ha-
much for that entity to handle.
Well, anything over a period of time changes, and sometimes, the center doesn't hold. It becomes, fragmented. Special interests get involved, and there's a point then in which it has to be pulled back together and managed. And my discussions now in Charleston, there are those who want to go back to a regent system. They want to go back to a governance system. They may not call it regents, they may call it, so you could call it a university system if you wanted to. You can call it anything,
Mm-hmm.
but what they see right now with each institution with its own governing board, for example, duplication of programs. I think almost every school in the state has a criminal justice program. And right now, there are only so many jobs. And if every school, public and private, is offering a criminal justice program, obviously not all those graduates are going to be employed. There are other areas where we have deficiencies. I see over and over again where schools are losing nursing programs. Well, we need nurses, and we need good nurses. It seems to me there is an area where we've overlooked. Right now, and I understand the history of it, there's a tremendous shortage nationally of good elementary, early childhood special ed teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Shortage. Now, I know why people went into business, accounting, management, and other areas, computer science, years ago, because teachers didn't get paid much. And in many cases, there weren't jobs. So people gravitated to other areas. Now, the pendulum's swinging back the other way. And somewhere in our system, we need to have 2 or 3 schools who are turning out state-of-the-art teachers.
I know that currently the special education teachers, as you mentioned, I know this for a fact that they are being, they can be placed up to a year before they even graduate.
Exactly, on a permit basis, and when the very name special needs, if a student is a special needs student, the person who deals with that needs to be highly professional. And we've let this happen, and a lot of it is because I use the analogy of a football coaching team.
Uh-huh.
You may have 5 or 6 or 7 coaches coaching a football game, but one of those coaches has to have that whole game in his head. And it's the same with running a system of higher education. Somewhere there has to be an oversight that sees the whole system.
Do you think competition has played into that, and maybe they're feeding off each other and missing?
No question.
Yeah.
It has fragmented and gone in different directions, and you develop all kinds of little power groups and political groups. And our Board of Regents had equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans on it. I can never remember in all my years of dealing with them when politics became an issue with that board. They focused on the issues that came before them. When I was chancellor the first time, there was a bill in to close the osteopathic school of medicine. And that was one of my big challenges, was to keep that school open. And as I testified before committees, the one thing that I pointed out, I said, there are areas in the state of West Virginia, McDowell County, Mingo County, Logan County, where the graduates of WVU's medical school will really not go to located practice. Those people need medical help. The osteopaths, many of them will go there. And what we're talking about is a big area of southern West Virginia that's going to be greatly underserved if we don't train some people from those areas that want to go back there and live, just like I wanted to come back here.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, when it got down to it, we managed to salvage it. And that was, again, it's one of those things, and the Regents didn't want to close it. But it was it was a political move. So, you've got a group of people, and these were substantial people, who got a view of the needs of the whole state. And I'll have to tell you that those folks were highly supportive of keeping Glenville alive. Many of them said, some of my high school teachers or grade school teachers were Glenville graduates. Bill Watson, an attorney from Wellsburg, was president of the board. He said, I went to George Washington as a law student, and he said, you know what? He said, Lloyd Elliott, the president, said he went to Glenville State College. I said, yes. And so they had a high regard for the products.
How were the members of the board placed?
They were appointed by the governor.
Okay.
They were appointed by the governor, and they represented, there's so many from each political party, and they were fairly representative of business, and they represented a cross-section of the state.
Mm-hmm.
And now they made some unpopular decisions. Anytime that you make a decision, there are going to be those for it and those against it.
Uh-huh.
They did the hiring of the presidents, and they fired presidents.
Mm-hmm.
They decided where buildings were going to be built and where they weren't. But, it's if you make enough negative decisions over a long enough period of time, you build up a bigger and bigger group of opponents.
Yes.
And that's why every 20 years you kind of have to look at changing the organization. Now, where we are now, I don't think, for one thing, in the state of West Virginia, and I don't care where you are, it is hard to find with each local institution the kind of board membership to make what I consider are good and valid decisions concerning a higher education institution.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that doesn't apply to everybody, but it applies in some cases. I think that board members have to be chosen very carefully, and the politics aside. Now, I know that's a big order, but you can't ever let narrow political interests have a priority over the general good. You can't do it. And if you get hide taken off of you for standing up, that's what part of the job is.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of the tough decisions that they made, of course, that costs. And again, over a period of time, it kind of erodes their support. But you go back to the opposition to the Regents, and again, I go back to the Charleston Gazette. It just continually ran editorials about abolishing the worthless Board of Regents.
Mm-hmm.
I've been told several stories, and I can't validate them, but I heard one story that one member of the State Board of Regents and the editor of the Gazette were coming up Canal Boulevard one day in the car, and they got in an argument. And the board member pulled over and put the editor out. And from then on, there were abolish the Board of Regents editorials.
Uh-huh.
But I can't say that did or didn't happen. I just know that if you're around long enough and you make some negative decisions that affect certain people who are in a position to retaliate, it happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that the Regents did a good job, and I thought the Carnegie study was a good and thorough study. We were very open. They had everything, and as far as And Dolph Norton, who had been chancellor of the Ohio Board of Regents, chaired the committee. And he knew what he was doing. And so
from what I understand, one recommendation, as you said, the majority of everything was everything's fine, other than a couple small tweaks. One thing I understand was they did mention consolidating Marshall and WVU.
yes.
Did that spawn any sort of conflict or?
Well, to tell you the truth, that study was not considered long enough for it to happen. What happened after certain legislators saw the report and saw that it recommended continuation of a regent system, they announced that they were no longer following the Carnegie study. And that's when we wound up with two boards, a university.
So it had to be a majority. A majority of legislatures
Yep.
felt that way.
Yeah. And there's no question, as you look now, the focus is on WVU and Marshall. And we have WVU on one end of the state, and we have Marshall on the other end.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I propose, just, you sit down once in a while and think of strategies. One of the things I proposed, here we have small schools in central West Virginia. Glenville, Fairmont's not that big. The Nicholas County campus, Flatwoods is there. I proposed what I called a Central State University, a cluster university with campuses in different places in central West Virginia: Clarksburg, Weston, Flatwoods, Summersville, Glenville to be a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And offer master's degrees. Because, right now, a lot of people can't afford to go to Morgantown. A lot of people can't afford to go to Huntington.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that there isn't a need for good university-type education in central West Virginia. Well, that went over like a lead balloon. But it still made sense because a lot of rural states have cluster campuses.
Why do you think that's? I mean, I do believe you. I 100% believe you that's how it went over. But why do you think that is?
The political power lies with the universities. You look at the law school at WVU. A great number of legislators are graduates of WVU Law School. And it's a matter of the control in the state. And I went to WVU, and I was appreciative of it. But I've also come to realize there are some very intelligent people here in this rural area of West Virginia who would be lawyers or would be accountants. They would have MBAs if it were part of the possibilities in their lives, and now it isn't. They can't go. I mean, I know 2 or 3 young people here in the county right now who would love to enroll in a master's program and teach. They got jobs and they got kids. They can't go to Marshall and they can't go to WVU. They would drive up to Flatwoods and take graduate classes. It would fit into their lives.
Yes.
And I think, I got punished a little bit for proposing this. Because what it looks like is you're creating another university. Well, look at what we have. We got Fairmont University, we've got Concord University, West Liberty University, it goes on and on. And, before I left GSC, I realized that we were going to have a master's program. I mean, if we're going to be with Concord and Fairmont and the other 4-year schools that we were part of, we didn't have the human or financial resources to do that 5th year. Because if you look at teacher certification, for the most part, It's a 5-year program. So I worked with the folks at Marshall, and I said, well, would you be able to cooperate with us and offer that 5-year, that 5th year of a 5-year program? And yeah, I had things set up where we would have had a 5-year teacher education program, and it would have been a Glenville State Marshall University degree. And, you know, politics can be good or it can be bad. There were a lot of folks here who saw it as a threat, not as a step forward. Our loss of Nicholas County was a major blow because I had almost 1,000 students enrolled there. And in 5 years, we would have had another 1,000. So there were people, and again, this comes down to politics. There were people in Nicholas County who were saying, well, gee, we get 2,000 students, we're going to be bigger than the main campus. Mm-hmm. Maybe we just move it up here. There were people here who said, gee, if Summersville gets bigger than we are, it's going to be a threat. And when this revision of missions occurred a few years ago, and we lost Lewis County and lost Braxton County.
Would you have, prior to that in the mid-90s when all that really had gotten really going, would you have even referred to those campuses as community colleges?
We had a community college.
Mm-hmm.
Until community colleges were separated from the other colleges, every 4-year school had a community college component.
Yes.
So what we had here was a community college with forestry and surveying and, you know, some other things that normally fell into a community college, as other schools did. And then, you know, if you wanted to get on into a 4-year degree program, that's fine, it's all there, which made great sense. But, you know, divide and conquer is an old game. And there were those who thought, well, we shouldn't have community college work along with academic education.
But really our extension offices, I mean, they weren't just community colleges.
No. We were giving teaching degrees in Nicholas County and business degrees, 4-year degrees. Mm-hmm. And I'll have to tell you, when I went up there to teach, some of the best students I've ever taught anywhere were right up there. Mm-hmm. Now, for those who, see, there were different points of view. There were those here who thought that Nicholas County is costing us money, that if it weren't for that, we'd have that money here. Well, it's quite the contrary. We didn't have athletics in Nicholas County. We didn't have dormitories up there. It was all classroom instruction. And the tuition and fees that we collected there helped to support and maintain this campus big time. And it's you know, we had to expand up there once. I was able to get the city of Summersville to put the public library right there beside the building, and they didn't want to do it. The people who used the public library wanted it uptown. Mm-hmm. But we didn't have money for a library, and I thought, well, you kill 2 birds with 1 stone. We have a library available here, and they still have a public library, so that's where we put it. We had a great thing going there, and people there wanted teaching degrees and business degrees. They did not want to be excluded and made a community college. They did not want that. They didn't want it. We shouldn't have wanted it, because that was our greatest source of enrollment, the greatest source. And it came about because the region said you need to reach out into your service area and generate enrollment. And we did that. And I had almost 2,500 students when I retired. And it was not easy.
So I understand what you're saying about the breakup of the board and how that happened. It basically just ran its course.
It did.
It's like you said, people get the idea that the Board of Regents has done A, B, and C. It must be bad.
Well, that's true. And I can tell you that a lot of the decisions that come before a board are very difficult. In other words, whatever decision you make, it's not going to be a good decision. Mm-hmm. And what you do, you choose the least harmful out of 4 or 5 very harmful decisions. And they got burned a time or two when they tried to combine Concord and Bluefield. Mm-hmm. Theoretically, you should be able to do that. But they didn't go about it the right way. For one thing, no one went down there and actually paved the way for it. If you're going to do something like that, you've got to go and test the waters and talk to people and explain to them.
Don't just say it's happening.
Yeah, what you're going to do. You just don't say it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. Because it doesn't work that way. And if people think that you're trying to force them, they're going to resist. And they did. Now, there's an effort being made. There are classes that are offered at Bluefield and Concord, vice versa. They're attempting to hire faculty that will work both places.
Articulation agreement.
Yeah, they're trying to massage it so that it will be acceptable. Mm-hmm. I've done some work with the governor's office and the chancellor's office on budget cutting strategies for higher education, and it was done in light of when the federal stimulus money is gone.
Yes.
And that's 2014. There are many scenarios that are on paper. I don't have them, but they're part of higher education's planning. And situations like combining Concord and Bluefield, if those schools exist, both of them, that may have to be, because there may not be the funds to operate them as they are. Mm-hmm. And there are some other changes which I don't want to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, why do once the Board of Regents was dissolved, it was split into, correct me if I'm wrong, especially with the terms, it was split into a university and a state college
board, yes.
2 different boards.
Yes.
Why was that so short-lived?
I'm not sure. One of the things that, when I look back in the history of it, the small colleges had some very strong presidents. Dr. Hardway, Fairmont, I was here. Well, you could go on and on. The colleges actually in a meeting where decisions were made, the colleges had more clout than the universities. And one of the things, and I guess if I were over here with the universities, I wouldn't want these small college guys getting together and controlling the agenda. Mm-hmm. That was a part of the thinking. We got to get the small colleges over here so we can do our thing. And for a state this small, that never really made any sense. Uh-huh. I could understand. Now, the big discussion early on was to have a University of West Virginia governing board. Not WVU governing it all, but a University of West Virginia governing board. And that's fine. That's you could have that and still have a governance system. But somehow splitting off the small colleges from the universities, as you look at it, it probably was a move to weaken the small colleges politically, mm-hmm. strategically. Now, once that was done, then we essentially got a coordinating board, which coordinates. It doesn't have any governance authority at all. The governance authority was given to each college and university's governing board.
And that would have happened.
Well, that happened when when at the end of the college and university separate governments, they were governing boards.
Okay, so that's the 99-2000 change.
Yep.
Okay.
And so where we are now, I think there's enough time passed that, well, I spoke with the Secretary for Education and Arts not long ago, and she said, you know, we really need to be thinking about going back to a governance system. And particularly if there's some hard decisions that are going to have to be made. There's no politician that's going to recommend privatizing a college or combining colleges. They can't do it. But if you have a board that is authorized to do so, and they sit down and there is not enough money to operate everything you're doing now, that hard decision falls to them.
So you actually believe that correct me if I'm wrong, but you feel that the division into the young governing boards, and WVU would have been the same. They didn't have their own governing board until then, right?
They had a board, and I think it was different than the other boards because of their land grant status. They had a board, but no, it was not. They were subject to the Board of Regents and the university board.
Okay. So basically, as you mentioned, divide and conquer. I mean, even though it seems, in theory, it seems wonderful that we have, Glenville graduates and local individuals and different things at each institution, governing, but in reality, it's basically divided the system and could be, overrun easier.
Sure. And again, not just because I was there. I was there, and I know the small colleges were. The small colleges had a great deal of political strength, and when you look at it, there is a small college in every region of the state, all the way from West Liberty down to Logan. And at the time, Marshall University was not of the scope that it is now. Marshall was kind of an overgrown Glenville or Fairmont. It was a university, but it was not a large university.
Mm-hmm. It was developed in somewhat the same manner in the 1800s.
Exactly. It was it was into teacher training and some of the things we were into, and didn't have a medical school at the time, and so when you added up the numbers, the people that represented the small schools really represented the political strength of the state. And Glenville always had a good deal of political standing in the state because, people just simply knew we turned out good teachers and our people stayed in the state. Became involved in business and politics, and generally were looked upon very positively.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the basically break up the regions would have happened in, I guess that's 89, 90.
Yes.
For more or less the Carnegie study was ignored.
Yes.
To the majority of people. I'm sure there were some that were. Were there some that were upset that it was ignored, or was it just kind of swept under the rug? And
it was kind of swept under the rug. When you divide up a group, it's hard to get a cohesive group back together, and it was an effort that did divide people. I think that at the same time there were a lot of changes that were occurring in the legislature, new faces, new people with new ideas, and a lot of the older folks that had been there, kind of our stalwarts, they were leaving office. It was a time of change, And I think probably Governor Caperton was the guy who was really put in the position of having to decide. And if he were to talk to you today, I think he would tell you if he could do it over again, he would have kept the Board of Regents. In fact, he's told friends of mine that of the things he did, and he was a good governor.
Mm-hmm.
Of the things he did, he probably regrets having let the Board of Regents go more than anything else.
I had a question. Let it slip. So, how did the chancellor's position change at all? I mean, you were acting in it during that period. Was there two chancellors after that? Or?
I was acting chancellor in 83, 84, and then I became chancellor for a couple of years. So I had 3 years altogether. When I went in as chancellor, one of the missions that I had, the board wanted me to do a very careful examination of why we had had so much turnover in chancellor's positions. Because the longest any chancellor served, I think, was 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
We had just had a continual change. Well, the other thing, they told me they did not want me to give up my position here to do that. I had to be down there totally free to make whatever decisions were necessary.
Mm-hmm.
So the second time I was there, I went in with the idea that I was going to be evaluating the whole situation and see where I thought changes could be made to at least create more permanence. Because if you have chief executives turning over every 2 or 3 years, that undermines your leadership, and
Mm-hmm.
it accrues to somebody's advantage, but not to the organization. That probably, I was asked one time what that job was like, and I said, well, it was a high-level administrative job. It was like working in an emergency room in a big hospital. You never knew when the door opened what kind of problem you were going to deal with.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of times it was like being in the Tough Man contest, because it was a difficult job, but a job that was doable. I think the one thing one advantage I had that the others didn't have, I was the only West Virginian to ever serve there. When someone came in from Logan County to talk to me, I knew exactly where they were. I knew where they lived, and I knew something about the culture.
Mm-hmm.
The same was true all over the state. I think the only town in the state that I haven't visited is Welsh. I've been everywhere else and know somebody. So I had a feel for where they were coming from. And also with the legislature. When I went in as acting chancellor, the relationship between the legislature and Board of Regents was terrible. And one thing that the board wanted me to do was to try to repair our relationship. They said, you're a West Virginian, you can talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went in and I had 1 hour each with 70 legislators. I had 70 legislators that I spent 1 hour each with. And what I found was interesting. I found that there were some who were not interested in higher education at all. That wasn't their thing. They were on the agriculture committee or something else.
Mm-hmm.
But if you went in and sat down and talked with them, and they trusted you, you could always go back for help on education. And so I learned a lot about the dynamics of the legislature, and I learned that there were a handful who basically called the shots in higher ed. And as a result of that working with the legislature, I turned the whole thing around and worked with the governor, and we got a 10% increase in all of higher education's budget. everybody got a 10% increase. Public schools got a 10% increase. I joined forces with the public school people, and we got our salaries up. And I got letters from professors at WVU thanking me. They said, we haven't had a raise like this forever.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be done, but you have to communicate with the folks there. Now, you know, that worked, and so when I went back, things had changed some. Some of the politics had changed. I determined that basically there were at least 3 vice chancellors. Now, every time chancellor left, they didn't leave. And I had one of them to just openly say to me, I've outlived X number of chancellors, and every time one leaves, my life just gets better. And I said, well, you know, you may not outlive this one. And basically what I saw was the politics there. The vice chancellors stayed, chancellors left. And it was a kind of, you know, interagency politics where certain people benefited from the change at the top.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did, I reorganized the office and I changed all of those titles from vice chancellor to director. We had a director of finance, not a vice chancellor for finance.
Mm-hmm.
We had a director of academics, not a vice chancellor for academics. The only one chancellor's title in the office, and that was the chancellor. And the board appreciated that, and that's exactly, the chancellors coming in from outside were being undermined, and they didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
They were so busy, and they had to rely on these people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's so much going on, you have to rely on that next level. And if they're not loyal and working on your behalf, they can do you damage that you don't know about and that you can't recover from.
Until it's too late, yeah.
Yeah.
Did the change, see, I'm not, I don't understand the system a whole lot, so after the Board of Regents was dissolved, did the Chancellor system, how did it change with that?
Well, the directorships, the titles stayed as directors. They didn't make vice chancellors. And what happened, of course, then each system hired a chancellor.
Okay.
So we had a state college system chancellor, and then we had a university system chancellor. So we really doubled the cost. We had 2 boards instead of 1. The cost for governance was double.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they did rely, the university system and the college system did rely on the same staff. So all we did, we split the system up, had 2 chancellors rather than 1, and I guess that allowed each chancellor to concentrate on a particular group of schools.
Okay. Both of your appointments, I mean, you knew from the beginning they were temporary, correct?
Sure.
Yes. Did you have an end date on the second one, or did it kind of?
Well, no, it's just that the Regents did not want me giving up my job at Glenville to stay there. Now, I could have stayed. That is not, and as they told me, you'll be president of Glenville a lot longer than you'll ever be chancellor,
Mm-hmm.
because that job is just such that, well, it's like I said about state superintendent, as long as you're not causing too much trouble, you're going to have support, but if politicians get unhappy with you, then you're out.
So were you chancellor over the state board for a period of time, or had you removed yourself before?
No, I wasn't. I was on the state board. I went to state board of education meetings, but no, we had no authority over, except in teacher education. We had to coordinate because we trained teachers and they certified them.
Oh no, I mean with the split up once it was Board of Regents.
Oh, I really consulted with both chancellors. They both wanted to. I spent a good deal of time talking to both chancellors.
Uh-huh. But that was a transition back to Glenville at that point.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, long after I was back here to Glenville, they would call and they wanted some of the benefits of my experience, and I told them, I said, look, I'll help you, you have to have been there to know some of the things that you need to avoid and some of the things you need to do.
Since there was two at that point, did that initially, was conflict initial, or did it, between the university and the state system? Not really?
Not really, no. We just accepted that, there were those in the state college system that thought, they were greatly relieved that they didn't have to go in and compete with the universities in a board meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those in the university system said, well, thank God we got rid of those little guys.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah, there really was not...
So any conflict was basically on the legislative level?
Yes, right.
And everyone else was just going about their jobs,
We
trying to
were
do the
just
best they could?
doing our jobs as best we could.
Okay. All right. Talk about your return to Glenville a little bit after your second chancellorship. At this point, really, you'd been associated with the presidency of Glenville for, I don't think you outdid Rohrbaugh. You did if you could say president.
Right.
Because he would have been a principal for several years.
Yes.
But you came back, and basically, at that time it had been about 15 years. Is that?
Yes.
Was there any thoughts about hanging it up at that point, or?
Well, one of the things I realized, Glenville was always going to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to grow it as much as I could, make sure that it survived.
Mm-hmm.
And, you can talk to folks here in the community. They knew that Parkersburg planned to reverse the roles of Glenville and Parkersburg. And so what I really wanted to do was to continue to build our enrollments in Central West Virginia.
And that's when you as you discussed earlier, given a lot of focus to the Nicholas County Center.
A lot of focus to the Nicholas County Center. The population was there. Mm-hmm. The need was there.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, what I've learned over the years about the campus at Glenville,
mm-hmm.
As you look at enrollment patterns and as they come and go, there's sort of a saturation point for on-campus enrollment at Glenville. If you look back over the history and look at our enrollment and where that enrollment is located, you'll find, give or take a little bit, that the enrollment on the main campus hasn't changed that much. Much of the differences in enrollment occur with the work that we do off campus.
Mm-hmm.
And so I figured that around 1,500 full-time students, if you have 1,500 full-time students on the main campus, you've about reached
maxed out.
the maxed out. And so if you're going to get to be 3,000, 3,500 students for your college, you have got to do outreach. And we were charged with doing that. That is not a selfish thing. We were given a 7-county area and told that we were to serve it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I tried to address that, and Nicholas County, again, it had the greatest potential of any of the areas that we served. Lewis County, yes, but Lewis County, again, a lot of those folks were oriented to Fairmont.
Mm-hmm. Were you building the Lewis County program in conjunction with Summersville?
Yeah, we were building Lewis County and Braxton County. We had some enrollments there. The only problem, we had our programs in the high schools in Lewis and Braxton. The only thing that we hadn't done was to create an actual physical facility.
Yes.
Which you have to be careful about doing if you're going to build a building somewhere. You got to be fairly good in your planning to make sure that you can fully utilize that building.
Mm-hmm.
The high school had room for us. It was handy for students, and so it made sense to do that. Now, if we were going to have 1,000 students in Lewis County, then we ought to look at having an actual physical facility,
Yes.
right? But we weren't at that point at that time. But my goal was to have 3,000 to 3,500 students. Now, if the legislature starts going over schools with a fine-tooth comb and there isn't enough money, you're better off with 3,000 students than you are 1,500. And that's something, I mean, it's not philosophical, it's simply being able to count.
Yes.
And that's, bottom line comes down to that. And, you know, again, but there were a lot of people who were looking at it politically. And if you're a local politician and you feel like you've got a lot of power, you don't want the people in Nicholas County starting to get your power. Same way if you're in Nicholas County and you're have a potential of outstripping something you're associated with in another county, you don't want them calling your shots.
Yes.
And that's where you get, sometimes, you know, success has its own problems.
Even though you'd been, you know, we'd been offering classes, or GSC had been offering classes for years in these different places. Did you initially get any sort of backlash from the other institutions when you set up shop?
No,
No.
not really. Fairmont, until I-79 really opened up that avenue, we'd always been very cooperative with Fairmont. The president of Fairmont and I, you know, Dr. Hardway had been a teacher of mine here. He and I we worked very cooperatively together, and then I hired a couple of presidents for Fairmont when I was in the chancellor's position. So, no, they had enough to do in Clarksburg, Fairmont, and that area, had enough enrollment. They didn't need to come to Flatwoods for student enrollment.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you look at the situation now, they are Clarksburg, Weston, Flatwoods.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it puzzles me that we have the capability of doing Flatwoods and Lewis County, and they're only 30 miles from us or less.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know what I would have done as president had that been proposed, but I don't think I'd want another institution that close to my back door.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what would you say to someone if they would, like myself, if I would describe the whole transformation, you know, from beginning to end? I mean, would you describe the transformation as being from, you know, a complete socialist type system to being more capitalistic?
Yes.
Okay.
During the, near the end of my presidency, I attended meetings all over the state, and I was on economic development committees with the governor, and I was involved in a lot, and I kept hearing over and over, colleges and universities are economic development engines, and they should be run by business people, not educators. They're businesses. They make money. We need presidents who are business people, not educators.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I saw that coming. And, you know, I knew some people on the campus at WVU who were just outstanding teachers and scholars. I haven't heard anything about them in 10 years. I hear about the football program, and I hear about various initiatives that obviously are going to generate a lot of funding.
Did this transformation, was it nationwide? Was it a nationwide transformation?
I think it was nationwide, probably came to West Virginia a little later than some other states.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, it may be just my background, but I think whoever heads a particular type of business should be very familiar with that business. Now, it's true, education is a business, However, it's a very special business. And, you know, if you've taught 7th grade English, 12th grade English, if you have taught and know what goes into it, and you're running a school and issues come up about English, you'll know something about it. If you've never taught, you say, well, you know, what's wrong here? It may be, you know, I've looked at situations where students made A's and B's, but half of them have to take remedial classes. It doesn't take a genius to figure out there's something wrong with that discrepancy. And usually it goes back into a classroom, goes to grade inflation, goes to some things that you can point to.
Mm-hmm.
I still feel, you know, a lot of business people consider educators as fuzzy heads. You know, we just are mindless professors.
Not making anything, not doing anything.
Exactly. And I didn't go into education to make money. I went because I really appreciated what my teachers did for me, and I wanted to give back.
Mm-hmm.
I went to a superintendent's meeting over at Clarksburg not very long ago, and I think almost half of the superintendents in that meeting I'd had some time or other as students.
Mm-hmm.
Now their hair wasn't as white as it is now, but that's what, to me, and they're coming over and thanking me for the experience they had at Glenville. That's why I was there. It wasn't to see how much money I could make or how much money I could get into the foundation. When I built the art and music building, it was called the Miracle Building because the Regents had determined they would never build another building at Glenville. The night that we dedicated that building, we had the West Virginia Symphony Orchestra. I looked around in that audience and I saw people from Rosedale, from Tanner, from Troy, from Normantown, from Sanford. I saw people out here sitting there listening to an orchestra performance that I wouldn't have expected to be there, and I thought, you know, that's what...
And probably never would have.
And never would have. That's what this building was for. And it's those kind of things to me that, and I've known a lot of great educators, and I still talk with one every week, Dr. Jim Rowley, who was president of the College of Graduate Studies, and he was an interim chancellor, good West Virginia, a dedicated educator.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, those were the people who were my mentors. They were people who cared about West Virginia, they cared about education, and they knew about the values of education. They were not in any of this to see how much capital they could raise for the foundation or whatever. But I can tell you in today's world, if you're president of an institution, you're not out there raising money, you're not going to be there long. And again, you know, it's like that football coach that has to have the game in his head. You need to know what's going on in your academic programs. You need to know what's happening with your finance. You need to know, you have to have your finger on the pulse of that whole school. And I think that right now there's an awareness of what you're saying about the capitalism, both in public schools and higher ed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're about to see the pendulum swing back the other way. I just
But not as much in public schools.
No, not as much in public schools. Right now, if you were in public schools, I think greatest element there has to do with school building and construction and a lot of high-tech equipment. There's a lot of money in that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, there again, I realize my background is not high-tech. But I hear discussions all the way from 24/7 electronic learning to traditional classroom teaching. And we need to have a discussion about that as to what kind of balance we should have. And we haven't had that discussion. There's a lot of money. If you can sell a lot of computers to a school, you're talking about a lot of dollars.
Yes.
And, you know, I played football. I love football. I know the value of sports. But it can't be the most important thing that goes on in a school. It just can't.
Which some institutions seem to gravitate towards, especially. Seems like the flagship institutions of the states.
Exactly. Because there's more money than we can even imagine involved in that big sports program.
Would you like to talk, much about your final few years? I mean, it's documented that you ended up having some issues and whatnot with some faculty members and different things. I've heard it described as you described the Board of Regents. You stick around long enough.
Oh, I think that's true, and I knew that. And it doesn't matter what kind of job you're doing. There were those who said, with the political contacts and the knowledge that I had, as long as I was able to hobble into the office, Glenville should have kept me. But I ran the school, and there were others who wanted to run it. And maybe it was time, it just happens. And yeah, I had, maybe half a dozen faculty members. That happens. I didn't change my course. Right to the last day, I did my job the way it should have been done, and I thought, well, okay, I wrote out exactly the things that needed to be done yet, left everything on my desk, walked out, and a new man came in, it was there. There was nothing hidden or concealed. We had a good enrollment. We were fully accredited, and I left $2.5 million in the budget.
But you were aware that there, as it always had been, you were aware of the legislature that there would be issues.
Sure. Yeah, and it's not over. It is very definitely not over.
Well, I know this might be something you don't even want to comment on, but would you like to describe, anything that happened after, or anything that you had dealings with, or maybe you stayed completely out of it?
Well, I stayed, when I left it, I stayed out of it. My predecessors never interfered in anything that I did. They were very professional. Yes, when I left, there were things that have happened that I wouldn't do, but I'm not the president. I will say that when I was president, I did run the school. Now, I consulted a lot. I didn't just go out here and shoot from the hip. I put it in a context, and I talked to the people I needed to, tried to make sure I was headed in the right direction. But 21 years in a position like that's almost unheard of. In fact, the Regents had a policy, 10 years. 10 years was it. Well, I did 10 years, and then I went to Charleston and came back, and I did another 10 years. So and what they told me was this. They said Glenville is different and unique, and it needs a unique leader, and you're it. And so that's what I tried to do. I understood it. And I also understood that there were those who saw presidency at Glenville as being a ticket to political success. And it got there. I understood all of that. I understood the faculty members were manipulated. I have had apologies from several folks after the fact. They said, we didn't know. I said, well, that's okay. There are a lot of things you get into you don't know. I put in my time, I did my job, and I'm a classroom teacher. And I went to Summersville in a school that I helped build, and I taught a wonderful group of students. I taught graduate students for Marshall. A lot of those students I taught for 6 years. And I can go visit them in Webster where they're teaching, or Richwood, or wherever. And I hooded my last 2 graduate students last year. So yeah, I started out in the classroom. I heard a lot of complaints about students while I was president, and I thought, well, I'll see. And what I found is that students are like they've always been. They'll do what you ask them to do. And if you go in the classroom and act like you're tired, they'll be too. And so I love teaching, and I love students. I love education, and that's what I spent my time doing. And from the very day I was named as president, I had a few of those faculty members who were working. They wanted an opportunity to apply for that job. So, and that.
But you had several years without much problem at all. For
absolutely.
Me.
And I really, through the efforts of the regents and my efforts, and a lot of people who were on our team, they wanted us to succeed. We did. We took the college to it's a good level, and I'm just sorry that folks didn't help me get that 5th year so that the student who went here could get that 5-year degree in teacher education, because they're going to have it. And what's going to happen now, I don't know. I don't think there are any of those 4-year institutions that started out as 4-year institutions that still are, except Glenville.
Well, what's your opinion of something that's becoming big? I don't know, if another one of those pendulum type things, online education. Do you think it's about to its point of coming back?
I think that traditional, for example, in public schools, we're now talking about returning to cursive writing. Okay, that's an admission that just sitting down at the computer is not going to teach you to write. So yes, I think we're about to, and the new Common Core standards really demand it, and not only that, it's going to measure the degree to which you have accomplished what the goals are. Yes, it's going to take a while. I'd like to see it happen next year. It ain't going to do that. It's going to take 5 to 10 years to get back, because we know that nationally students are not doing well in reading and math. We know that. Our own high school is below the state average in reading and math, and I'm working hard to try to change that. There are a lot of things that have happened to cause it. We have a lot of cultural changes. We have a lot of changes in the view, the kind of methodology we ought to use. When I retired and Marshall wanted me to teach their graduate students, they said, if you teach online, my golly, you can make a good deal of money offering these classes. Well, I'm a classroom teacher. I like to go in right on the board and get chalk dust on my sleeves and ask questions and carry on a dynamic in the class. And I started looking at it. I bought a computer and I started looking at it. And this isn't me. This isn't me. And I declined to do it. Most of the grad students I had said that they wanted the kind of teaching I did, that they didn't like online classes. And I be quite honest, if I were an administrator hiring a teacher and they had a total online degree program, I wouldn't hire them. Education is a humanizing process, and that element has to be there. A lot of us are what we are and who we are because of some good teachers who were good examples and good models. And you have to, sometimes some of you go to class and you're not feeling well, or you've had a loss in your family or whatever. The teacher looks back, he knows there's something wrong, and he may come back and pat you on the back and say, well, is there anything I can do?
Mm-hmm.
That's priceless, and you can't do it with the computer.
Yes. All right. Well, moving a little bit further, and basically to wrap up, let's talk about what you're doing now.
Well, what I'm doing now, I've got a whole table full of folders in there. I'm president of the Gilmer County Board of Education. I am because people I respected a couple of years ago came to me and they said, well, we need your help. And I told them I was not interested in getting into county politics. I never got into county politics all the time I was at the college. And people in the county just trusted me to run it. Well, my wife and I sat down here one evening and she said, well, you're here. You have more education and experience than anyone else in the state. They need you. You need to help. So I got into it. I soon saw what the problems were. They're fixable. And so I was appointed superintendent. At that time, the State Department they'd made a decision to intervene, so I never actually got into that. I ran for school board at, again, the urging of these folks, and was elected president of the board, have been for a year.
Was that a unanimous decision to elect you as the president of the board?
Yes.
Okay.
We managed to get an excess levy renewed, only county in the state, because we went out and talked to them. I helped Delegate Boggs and Delegate Walker with a new governance system for inter-county schools. We did it the last day of the session. And that school over at Lynn is going to have equal governance. Now, the way the law was, Lewis County would run it all. They'd hired the teachers, they'd have done everything. And I said, that's not a partnership.
Mm-hmm.
So now we have the superintendent and board president from each county and a representative of the state superintendent will make all the decisions. So we've done some good things. I want to improve.
Is there still going to be an advisory board?
Well, it's going to be a governing board.
Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah, it's kind of like having another county board of education.
Uh-huh.
And that, not many people know that, but we made it a pilot school so we could do that.
Mm-hmm. It's first in the state, is that correct?
First in the state, and as I told them, if we didn't change it, it'd be the only one in the state.
Mm-hmm.
Because all we could do, if it were under the old law, we could send students over there and reimburse Lewis County.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it's called an inter-county school, so that wasn't right.
Mm-hmm.
But it's way it should be now, and I think it's a wonderful thing. I think we're going to see more and more of these schools. The dynamics of the state have changed, and people are going to have to come to grips with it.
And the same logic that says that dictates Glenville State College needs to be here dictates that school should be in existence, somewhat.
Yes. The highway system has changed the dynamics of the state. Economics have changed it. For example, Gilmer County's lost 50% of its student enrollment in the last 10 years. And the geography hasn't changed, but the population has, the economics, and I'll add another element, the culture. We're dealing with kids from broken families. We're dealing with a lot of kids who get themselves ready to get on the bus. They haven't had breakfast. They dress themselves. They come to school. And basically the guidance they get comes from the schools.
Mm-hmm.
That's
disabilities that seem to be on the increase.
It's on the increase. Mm-hmm. And I think there are challenges. I think that as we prepare teachers, now that I look at it, the teacher that's going out in today's classroom has to have a different kind of training than what I had when I trained. For example, I talk about that fifth year, just the knowledge that you have to have of using instructional technology. In addition to your academic programming and what you need, the tools you need to teach your subject, you got to learn all the use of this technology. There's no getting around it. That takes some time. And so basically, as I see it, it takes 5 years. Well, if you're going to spend 5 years, get a 5-year degree.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in a period of transition. I described it the other night at a board meeting in terms of Matthew Arnold. He said in one of his poems that his time was, he described it as caught between two worlds, one dead and the other powerless to be born. So we're in a pattern now where the pendulum is swinging back to where I think we were in the 50s and early 60s, the expectations, and it's going to put a strain, on everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Parents are going to have to accept the fact that a child's not going to come home with an A or a B on every report card. We're just getting back to trying to put credibility in our educational programs, and that's going to apply. The public schools, it's going to shake higher education up also. And as far as the dynamics in the state, I don't know. I can't predict what will happen. I do know that when the federal stimulus money's gone, that may represent as much as 20% of the budgets. Students are already paying an awful lot. How much more can you ask them to pay?
Mm-hmm.
It's a real dilemma.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, before I wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to say on camera?
Well, I think this is good. I've appreciated it. I could probably give you 2 or 3 days of some things.
Yes.
I think we've hit some of the highlights. There's so much, behind the scenes that actors and situations that I know of that were helpful. And you talk about the problems that toward the end of my term, I was not the only president. There were 5 state college presidents, all that had no confidence votes supposedly the same year.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a coincidence. 5.
Mm-hmm.
And the boards never paid any attention to those kinds of things anyway. They looked at whether you were running a school.
Yes.
And we had a number of issues, at the state level. I had some criticism for my role in the ouster of a chancellor, and at that time I was chairman of the Council of College and University Presidents. There's a certain fellow at Ohio State that made that motion.
Uh-huh.
And 17 college and university presidents, 15 wanted a change, and they had a reason for it. And we still carry around some of that stuff like a dog carries a bone around, because it was just not right. And because I was president of the presidents and the spokesperson for the presidents, some of that got tagged on me.
Yes.
But you know what? We talk as presidents yet. We'd do the same thing tomorrow if we were in the same position.
Mm-hmm.
Just one of those things that time and situations call on you to make a decision, and you make it.
Mm-hmm.
So, you don't do everything perfectly, but, in the balance, if you do more positive than you do negative, that's not all bad.
Yes.
But I do believe 100% in the value of education.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for your time, Dr. Simmons, and I want to thank you for taking part in this interview, and I especially want to thank you for your service to Central West Virginia and your service to Glenville State College.
Well, thank you.